Greetings, fellow classmates and Dr. Armstrong for HS512 American Christianity. My name is Clynt Reddy, and this is my narrated PowerPoint for the topic of revival and the voluntary principle. Basically, the prompt for this is I'm the English counterpart of Alexis de Tocqueville, and basically, I've been traveling in the United States for the past couple of years and now having a chance to share some of my observations, findings, analysis with fellow Anglicans back home in England. So that's kind of the gist of the presentation for the next couple of minutes here, and hope you guys enjoy it, and thanks for listening. This is a picture of the United States. It's a picture that shows the vastness and the breadth of the American frontier. It really sums up that this is a land of opportunity and it's a land of energy. It's a place that I have spent the last 5 years in, traveling from as far north as New York and as far south as Virginia, and even as far west as into Pennsylvania. But the country is growing, and there's a sense that there's expansion that's going to continue on the way. But I wanted to start off just giving you guys a sense of the topography of the frontier of what it's like. Back home in England, here chatting with all of you here, and again, back after 5 years of traveling, it's now 1832, excuse me, and so I got to the States in about 1827. And I've been traveling around ever since, observing particularly a lot of the religious revivalism that's been there. And again, like I mentioned, like the picture that I showed just before kind of alludes to. This is a place of really tangible energy. It's incredible what you can feel there in the sense of not just religious energy, but even this political and entrepreneurial energy as well. And the thing that I'm just left with is that it's unlike a place. It's a place unlike anything I've ever seen. Particularly when I think of being back home here in England and how we call this really small island home, and just the vastness of the American frontier. It just continues to expand, and it seems like it never ends. Let me just show you this before we kind of jump into a lot of the bulk of this presentation. But I think this picture really shows the contrast or the breadth of experience that we find in America. Whereas the first picture I showed with mountains and with this incredible maybe epicness to it, this picture shows some more tranquility, some more peace, more stillness to the American world, which to a certain degree is particularly true. Again, considering maybe even just 50 years earlier, bloody Revolutionary War. Our own people, whether they're close family or friends or people that we've known for a long time or part of our heritage, fought for independence. And it felt to me in a sense that there was this time in the American story where they're just beginning to transition and they're beginning to have a sense of peace and tranquility. But don't let that fool you. There's this energy, like I said, that's welling up there, and there's a revivalism that's sweeping across this land, and I got to taste it in very, very interesting ways. So here are the pressing matters, right? Why am I talking to you? Why are you listening? How is it that this American Protestantism or American revivalism, we could even call it American evangelicalism, I'll probably use those terms interchangeably in a sense, even though they're talking about maybe three distinct expressions of what's going on the American frontier. But how is it that this is thriving in coming off the heels of the Great Awakening and coming off the heels of the American Revolution? What are the things that are contributing to really an incredible growth and expansion of Protestantism, especially in America? And then there's two questions for us here back home in England. Basically, is this something we can trust? The fact that things are growing and the fact that things are expanding in such really unbelievable ways. Can we here across the Atlantic, can we trust what's going on there? And basically that boils down to a question for me, and I hope for you, of is this from God? Is what we're seeing in terms of this incredible rapid expansion of American Protestantism and revivalism, is this manufactured by man, or is this really a sign that God is at work? in the former American colonies. I want to share a short quotation here from the great Jonathan Edwards, a man who is obviously had a tremendous history both here in England and in now what is the United States. But listen to this, and I think it really captures the essence of the American revivalism. He says here, this is in 1733, Edwards says, "There is a difference between having an opinion that God is holy and gracious and having a sense of the loveliness and beauty of that holiness and grace." I think this sums up in a tremendous way that the defining characteristic of American evangelicalism, of American revivalism, of American Protestantism is that it's not just in the mind, but it's in the heart as well. What I could sense more than anything else was that experience was pursued. And there was this tremendous sense that you could not just know God or know about God, but you could actually know God. And I think that's maybe the driving force behind what's going on here, is this deep sense of emotional experience with the divine. So the question is, like I said, how is this thriving? How is this growing? One of the things that I noticed more than anything else is while I was traveling in the now United States is trees everywhere, really, and forests and all different kinds of trees. And what it made me think of was, is there a way for me to understand the thriving American revivalism kind of with this picture or with this metaphor of a tree? And I really think it does a good job of illustrating for us, painting a picture for us of how we can best understand what's going on in the new America. Because, a tree has roots underneath the ground, roots that you don't really see, but they're integral to what the tree is. And then all trees have trunks. It's their support, it's the thing that holds them together, and then all trees have branches and leaves. And that's kind of the expression or the fullness of what that tree is and what that tree could be. So in the same way that physical trees kind of have this sense, one of the things that was impressed upon me in viewing American evangelicalism or revivalism was that it really was similar to that structure, that there's some roots there that we just don't see anymore because maybe they happened too long ago, or they're just not present anymore, but they're essential to what's going on. And then there's this sense of their support. There's a tree trunk there that's holding everything together. And then there really is some expressions of what that evangelicalism looks like. So I'm going to argue, I'm going to suggest here that the roots really are English. And the trunk maybe can best be described as democratic. And these branches are evangelistic in a sense. So again, if I were to explain how I see American revivalism thriving, it's because of the English roots, it's because of a democratic trunk or support system, and it's exhibiting itself with these evangelistic branches. And I'll unpack what I mean by this, but this is the picture that I kind of want us to have in our minds as we walk through the next few minutes here. So English roots, what do I mean by that? Well, these are things that are happening behind the scenes, or maybe they're happening beneath the surface, or maybe they've happened so long ago that they're just no longer visible of what's going on. And really for me that lands on two things. It's the Puritan settlements in the 1600s, and it's the American evangelists, or the Anglican evangelists, of the Great Awakening in the 1700s. And I think these two sequential movements are instrumental to what we're seeing now in the 1800s of what's happening in the United States. Again, and I think both of these are predicated on what Edwards says and what here Galstad and Knoll kind of share in their book, that many found the vitality of immediate religious experience far more meaningful than traditional forms or received ways. And when we think about the roots of what's going on here, I find it so ironic that they're English roots. I mean, these are American colonies, which were English colonies, and the Puritans and the Anglicans, like George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards, they're from our tribe. They're from this land. And I find it so interesting that they're the ones who kind of touched off what we're now seeing today in this American revivalism. I think the Anglican preachers and the evangelists, like George Whitefield, for example, really grabbed onto that. Really were able to capitalize on the tremendous amount of desire that people had to know God and to experience God. And really it was, in a sense, a reaction to a lot of Enlightenment rationalism and a lot of ecclesiastical straitjackets that really have come to define what it means to be religious here in Europe. But the Great Awakening, led by guys like Whitefield and by Edwards, I think it really shows that there is a tremendous, tremendous amount of power in the ability to experience God and having people bring us into that experience. I think that's kind of the root cause of what we're now seeing expressed all over the United States of America. Here's an interesting quote from Nathan Cole, just from his diary. Not someone who's particularly famous by any means at all, but I think he communicates in this little excerpt here the hunger and the desire to meet God, to hear with God, and particularly to meet God and hear with God through the great preachers of the Great Awakening. Here's what he says in 1740. This is Nathan Cole. He said, "I dropped my tool that I had in my hand and ran home to my wife, telling her to make ready quickly to go hear Mr. Whitefield preach." And that moves me to my second point. As we look at this trunk, as we look at the structure of what's in place that's really supporting evangelistic revivalism thriving all across the former American and English colonies. And 4 points here, really short, and I'll illustrate all of them with a quotation. But here are 4 things that I think are just holding together the continued expansion of revivalism in the United States. Expanding education, ecclesiastical independence, disestablishment, and voluntary principle, especially those last 2, particularly because they're happening and still developing right as we speak. But again, let's unpack these and kind of talk through a little bit of how this trunk is being structured and what the support really is here. Again, emerging out of the Pietists and the Puritan movements, and really just having a sense of all those that were coming to the United States, or to the, English colonies in the 16 and 1700s, there really was a strong penchant for education and particularly for knowing the Bible. And I think this desire and this hunger was instrumental in making sure that the soil was fertile for the gospel and for revivalism to spread. Here's a quick excerpt from the college laws when Harvard was established in the early 1600s. This is from 1636. This is again in the college laws of Harvard College. It says, "Everyone shall so exercise himself in reading the scriptures twice a day, that they may be ready to give an account of their proficiency therein." I think this quote demonstrates what a tremendous hunger again that there was to know God's word in the early stages of the American development. And I think again that was part of that support system, part of that trunk. Maybe this sense of everyone needs to be literate, everyone needs to be versed, everyone needs to be in connection or in proximity to the scriptures. I think it's beginning to we're beginning to see the fruits of that in how quickly revivalism is spreading in the United States. Next thing I just want to highlight really quickly is ecclesiastical independence. And I think that this is maybe the predecessor to what disestablishment really took to an official level. But if we especially look at the Methodist Church and how it began to expand here in the United States, I think what you find is that the ecclesiastical straitjackets that I think held a lot of leaders in check or a lot of leaders in place, it was beginning to be removed as churches began to be planted in the colonies and as they began to grow and as they began to see the need for leadership. And I think this point, more than anything else, kind of shares how kind of being not under the strong auspice of a particular denomination or governing authority really helped leaders take some tremendous strides and really helped grow leaders that were instrumental in growing the church and in setting the tone for American revivalism. Francis Asbury is definitely one of those people, and Gossett and Knowles share here as the Methodist Church was beginning to really explode on the scene in the United States, how Asbury provided direction, organization, encouragement, and leadership, which then leads, I think, really nicely into this idea of disestablishment. which is basically the separation of church and state, which on the federal level is there in the United States Constitution. But in a sense, each of the states could, in some way, shape, or form, still walk through that. Connecticut, one of the states, is already disestablished, and I think that's and I'll show you a quote really soon here. But Massachusetts is one that's kind of in the process as we sit here in 1832. I'm sure in the next year or 2 years they'll kind of walk down this road of disestablishment as well and have this separation of church and state. Listen to this from Lyman Beecher in 1818. He said, "The best thing that ever happened to the state of Connecticut, it cut the churches loose from dependence on state support. It threw them wholly on their own resources and on God." Here's what Galston and Knowles share on page 84. They say, "Since the denominations could no longer rely on the state for support, they were forced to compete for adherence. In this competitive environment, churches and denominations that mastered the techniques of persuasion flourished." In a sense, it's almost as if disestablishment helped bring to the forefront the most conducive parts of a freer and more frontier-like society and an environment. And in the spirit of that entrepreneurial trajectory is the voluntary principle. And again, I think this is in step with this establishment, the fact that there isn't this larger institution that you have to rely on support, and it really fed a grassroots movement across the entire country of people organizing, people getting together, and really leading out of their own passions and their own convictions. Here's just a couple of voluntary societies that sprung up from about 1815 to 1825, and again, all really focused on this idea of how do we get the gospel to the far reaches of the country. Again, all of these, and again, if we think about that first developmental trunk piece, all right, the expanding education, all these relied or were champions of literacy. In a sense, they wanted Bibles in people's hands. They wanted an idea that people knew the scriptures, that they knew that they could meet with God, and tracts were a tremendous part of that as well. And I think in a sense, if we even go back all the way to the English roots, if we talk about the itinerant preachers of Whitefield and Edwards and others, check out this quote here from the American Tract Society in 1825. It says, "Such is the vastness of the country as to require, especially in the newer states, an itinerant system of evangelization." An itinerant system of evangelization. Again, if we look at those roots deep beneath the ground of what the Great Awakening did from these Anglican preachers like Whitefield and Edwards, we're noticing that is beginning to really be a part of the democratic trunk that has really supported American revivalism moving forward. And in the same way that preachers were able to travel and infuse energy, the American Tract Society is pulling on that same history or that same heritage and is saying we need to have the ability to empower ordinary grassroots citizens to be itinerants in a sense as well. They need to be the ones evangelizing, and let's just provide them with the resources to do that. Here are a few examples of tracts that I found on my journeys here. What is it that this looks like on the front lines? How is it that I could best describe American revivalism as I saw it, as I experienced it, as I observed it? And it's just three things for me. It's the prevalence of prayer, it's the power of preaching, and it's the push for piety. These were three things that I noticed time and time again in the 5 years that I was there. People had a hunger for prayer, and preaching was huge. Preaching, I think, defined a lot of what that emotional experience meant for many Americans. And there was this push for piety, and we see it particularly in the voluntary organizations. They weren't just concerned with having the gospel spread, but in a sense they were also very concerned with how in the world do we make sure that people aren't just believing the right things, but how do we make sure they're also living in the right way? And that was one of the other things that was of particular importance to the voluntary principle and to the voluntary societies was is there an orthopraxis in a sense to what it means to be an American evangelical or American Protestant or an American revivalist. check out this quote here from Susanna Anthony, and I think again this again describes in one sense how the environment of the United States being so difficult. This is new frontier, this is a new world, and people in a sense had to fend for themselves. They were going to encounter difficulty and struggle, but they relied on God. Here's Susanna Anthony in about the mid-1750s. She says, "And this day I find myself too disordered that I can attend on no duty with any fixed engagedness. Well, my God, I am thine. Let me not repine." In a sense, I think this quote shows us in a really powerful way how people relied on God. They relied on prayer. They relied on the community of their churches. They relied on the inspiration of preaching. They relied on kind of this push for a moral and a righteous life. And that really got them through some of the difficulties of living in a very hard place and in a place with a lot of transition, especially when we think maybe just a couple decades after this, the Revolutionary War is on American soil. To the point of preaching, one last thing I want to just mention before we kind of wrap up this and talk about, well, can we trust this American revivalism? Charles G. Finney, a guy that I had a chance to meet on a few occasions, and I'm telling you, he's going to be the next great preacher. Maybe even a second great awakening is on the heels in America because of this man. But it's incredible. He's a lawyer. He's a professor, he's a college president, and he's a preacher in upstate New York. And he's a guy that I'm very, very interested to see continue to develop, continue to expand his ministry. But as I think of those in the same mold as maybe an Edwards or a Whitfield, it looks like Finney could be that next guy in terms of great American preachers. So all this to say, again, and as we wrap up here, again, I want you to think about that tree in your mind, and I want you to think about those English roots with the Puritans and with the Great Awakening through the Anglican evangelists. I want you to think about this democratic trunk, and I use the word democratic there because, in a sense, I think what it communicates is that the support system is all about people rallying together. It's about people being literate. It's about leaders being able to exercise the best of their gifts. It's about not being held to institutions and in a sense in disestablishment. And then it's about maybe this entrepreneurial spirit that the voluntary principle really helped to touch off and maybe just help to ignite in really incredible ways. But I think I can best categorize that with one word: it's democratic. There was the sense that people were involved and that people were making a way. And then the evangelistic branches, the characteristics of American revivalism, it's about prayer, it's about preaching, it's about piety, and I think those things are still true. And again, I want you to notice how a lot of those characteristics, those expressions of those branches, find a lot of their heritage or their beginnings, and again, those English roots in Puritanism and in the Great Awakening. So I think for us here in England, the question is, can we trust this? Can we trust this American revivalism? Is this something that's legitimate? Is this something that's good? And I think what's in the back of my mind, and I'm sure what's in the back of all of your minds, is the American Revolution. Maybe 50 years earlier, a bloody war where we fought literally our own people, and our own people died in really difficult circumstances in a very difficult war. And I think those experiences and those memories are still very much in the forefront of our minds. I think it's a very sour taste in our mouth as well as the Americans' mouths. And so with that maybe in the foreground, is this something we can trust? Can we trust America? Can we trust the revivalism that's happening there? And I think the best way to answer that question is to ask, is this from God? Is this something that's just manufactured by man, or is this something in a sense that is from the divine and that is from God? And he says here, I'm reading from Gaustad and Nall, page 397, and this is Charles Finney, again, that next great American preacher, and he writes here, a divine influence seems to pervade the whole land. And really, as I was there, as I walked the cobblestone streets, as I went through the farmland, as I even ventured out west and saw some of the mountains and some of the epic frontiers, there was this tangible sense that God was there. There was this divine presence. There was this a holy manifestation, and so this is just my personal opinion, but I really think this American revivalism is from God. A lot of it we could say maybe manufactured in terms of the voluntary societies and disestablishment and these high-profile, energetic, emotionally charged leaders. But I really think that the undergirds and the undertones and even the overtones of what's going on here is a work of God and a work of the Holy Spirit. So what might be next? Here are some observations, some predictions that I have, if you will. I think disestablishment will continue to expand. Again, I think Massachusetts is on the heels of this. As we talk here in 1832, I'm sure in 1833, 1834, they also will have this separation of church and state, and I think that's going to continue to be the trend moving forward in the United States. I think the states are going to continue to push west. There's this entrepreneurial spirit, and I think there's some infrastructure there for that continue to happen. And I think as the church begins to expand west, particularly with the voluntary societies and particularly with how strong Methodists and Baptists especially are growing, I think the church is going to continue to expand as well. And so those are just some predictions that I have moving forward. And here's some questions I have for us back home. And again, I put a picture of a tree here, so again, we can kind of have that in the forefront of our minds. But what I see in America is really incredible. And I think it's something that could happen here in England. And so the question for me is, and I think maybe the question for all of us is, what might the Anglican Church look like without a connection to government? If it seems like disestablishment has touched off a tremendous growth in the United States, is that possible here? What could that look like with a church that's so tied to our monarchy and our system and our institutions? Is that possible here? And I think that's the second question as well, is are we ready? Are we ready here in England for a revivalism and a voluntary principle like those in America? Or are we too stuck in our ways? Are we too closed off to the idea that those that defeated us in war may have a touch of God on their leadership and on their country? And are we willing to be humble and ask ourselves, is that for us as well? Because I'll be honest with you, that the revivalism and the sense of entrepreneurial spirit and what the people of the United States are doing, it's really incredible stuff. And I wonder if we might be too calcified, if we might be too institutionalized, if we might be too structured, if we're holding on, if we're stuck in our straitjackets too much in order to experience that same kind of revivalism and voluntary principles. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think. Are we ready? And what might it look like? For those of you who may have caught the bug, if you're interested in joining me on my next voyage to the United States, I think it's going to be about 5 years until we're going to go again. August 1838 is when I'm hoping to take my next voyage to dock in Manhattan, start over in New York, see my good friend Charles Finney, and see how he's doing. And hope you enjoyed this presentation as we talk about the roots, the trunk, and the branches of American revivalism. And as we ask the tough questions of, can we trust this? Is this from God? And then as we look closer to ourselves and say, here in England in 1832, can we experience the same thing? Is this something that's a product of the hearts of people and the strategies of people? Or is it also equally a product of what the American frontier really demanded and the hardships that they faced and the entrepreneurial spirit they needed to engender? And can we do that here? So that kind of wraps up my presentation. Thanks for listening, and hope you guys enjoyed it.